Hello and thanks for joining me for a quick chat about Weep, Shudder, Die, A Guide to Loving Opera by Robert Levine. This is the most recent book that I finished. Following this chat, I will also touch base briefly on what I'm currently reading, as well as chat a bit about what my next read is going to be. But yeah, Weep, Shudder, Die. This was published in 2011 by HarperCollins. I wanted to read this, when I was curating my 2017 must-read list, I wanted to get a work about opera on the list because I have never read a book about opera. I wrestled with the idea, should I go with maybe a history of opera? Should I choose one of the main composers and read about that? Or should I pick a particular opera and, do sort of a deep dive into a particular opera? And ultimately I decided to go with just this general survey. So while I already love opera and I'm already sort of familiar with the basics of it and the more or less the main composers and the main works, I thought this would be kind of a fun and entertaining read, and give me a little more insight maybe into opera in general. And it turned out to really be the case. So, Weep, Shudder, Die. What this the title is actually part of a quote by Vincenzo Bellini. The full quote is, "Through singing, opera must make you weep, shudder, die." Yeah. There is a more serious, Opera 101 is another book that's better reviewed than this one for a general introduction to opera, but I decided to pick this book to read just because it did seem like it was going to be really kind of lighthearted, and it really was. So how it's structured is it starts with an introduction. The introduction is called "No Need to Wear Your Jewelry," and this talks about opera and how accessible it used to be to the general public. In the U.S., opera stars were really household names and in their day, and it's only really been in really the late 20th century when it really became more associated with mid to late 20th century when it more came to be associated as something inaccessible to the average person, because historically it has not been. Historically, it has been an art form for the public. So yeah, the introduction's really, really informative. Talks a bit about, very briefly, a few paragraphs about the history of opera. How it got started in the late Renaissance, early Baroque period, and then its development on through, really to the present day. But then the rest of the book is divided up into the main opera languages. The next chapter is called German opera, and it says, "Who's Afraid of Wagner and His Friends?" Then Mozart's operas get a whole chapter unto themselves. Then the next chapter is called Opera in English, and the subtitle for that is, "If you think it's easier to understand, think again." Italian opera, the subtitle is, "If you can hum it, it's probably Italian." And then French opera, the subtitle is "Demons, Gypsies, and Biblical Epics." And then Russian opera, "Choruses, Nationalism, and Tchaikovsky." And then there's an epilogue. He does not talk about Czech opera, because one of my favorite operas is by Dvorak, Rusalka, and that's a Czech opera. And there's a few other Czech operas that are performed, still widely. So, how each of these chapters are structured under each of these language groups, and then Mozart by himself, is a bit about the composers, the main composers in that language, and then the main operas in that language, and then within the operas, a brief sort of survey of the characters as well as a summary of the opera. And then he pulls out particular moments in the opera or particular music in the opera that really evokes certain emotions or really drives home the emotional point of the opera, or sort of why that particular passage is moving or important, or whatever like that. So in all, I think he ends up talking about 50 different operas in the book. So another thing he talks about is sort of the structure of the opera, and he talks about opera a lot as drama, sung drama. So I don't know if this is, I think this might, I don't know if this is widely known or not, but opera is basically a play. It's basically a theatrical play, a drama, a tragedy, a history, sort of like drama, like Shakespeare. There are comedies, there's tragedies, there's histories, but instead of being spoken, they're sung, although they're still acted. So whenever you actually go and see an opera, you're seeing a staged play, for example, a stage drama or stage tragedy, as well as it being sung. So you're, as well as very complex music, usually, and very difficult singing that requires really highly trained people to perform it. On top of that, the whole opera has to make sense dramatically, and the story has to move so the audience can follow the story dramatically, or if it's a comedy, then comedically. So he talks about that, and he talks about the different sort of methods in singing that's used for this. One is the recitative, which is the sung dialogue. So this is basically dialogue between characters that move our story along, that help us know what's going on, that let us know what's going on, that let us know what the characters are feeling, and what's sort of going to happen or is happening, and this is just really sung dialogue. So then there's arias, which is when kind of the action stops and we focus in on a particular character or a particular situation. We'll hear an aria. So the arias in opera, I think, are what's commonly recognizable to a lot of people, the famous arias out of the various operas. And these are moments in the opera where a character the action stops, and then the character's going to sing to us something particular to him or her, how they're feeling or what's going on. And then another sort of tool in opera is the chorus. A lot of operas will have a chorus that will comment, sort of like a Greek chorus, that will comment on the action, that sometimes the chorus comments either trying to warn characters, or the characters sometimes can hear the chorus and sometimes they can't. But the chorus sort of functions as a Greek chorus in a play. I thought that was real kind of cool to read about. So I found the whole thing just very sort of engaging. He's got a very funny way of writing, very sort of witty way of writing. I did want to read the last paragraph because I thought it was kind of cool. Let me just pull it up. I marked it here. One last thought. As long as there are people who love music, hysterical fantasies of murder, dominance, envy, obsessive love or lust, inexplicable moments of rapture, expressions of rage, and emotional rebirth or destruction, there will always be reasons to listen to opera. So I thought that was cool, because that's why I love opera. I love that the depth of it. It's just, to me, it's a beautiful way to interpret the human condition, like that quote said. And as far as engaging with opera, yes, it is something that does take a bit of effort, because it's like high drama. It's like Shakespeare. It's like you have to try a little bit to get into that world. But then once you do, you realize, you see the complexity of it, you see the beauty of it, and you see the multiple ways that it can be read and heard and interpreted. And then you know that every production and every performance that you see is different. It's going to be different. And every recording you hear of it is going to be different. It's going to be much different for you to go to an opera house and actually see an opera performed live. That's going to be a different experience than listening to a recording of it. And it's going to be different than watching maybe a streamed version or the live in HD versions at the movie theaters that the Metropolitan Opera in New York does. That's going to be a different experience because you're going to see close-ups of the singers in those types of streaming or DVD or the live performances that are broadcast in local theaters. That's going to be different than going and hearing it and seeing it in person. Then there's just this multiplicity of performances throughout history, performers, different opera singers of different eras, the different recordings, and then once you get into it, then you can listen to this recording maybe of Leontine Price singing Aida back in 1962, as opposed to the Aida that I recently heard when I went to hear Aida here in Washington really recently. So to me, it's just a complex, beautiful, sort of engaging, interesting world to learn about and to get involved in, and so I just really love it. I wanted to end the chat though with a quote from Virgil, and the quote is, "Let us go singing as far as we go. The road will be less tedious." That's Virgil from the Eclogues. So I think I'll end the chat with that. I did love it. I will next. I don't currently have a work on my must-read list for next year, but I would like to get to an opera. I would like to start reading books now about particular operas or about particular composers. So hopefully that'll be coming up sometime not too far in the future. So what I'm reading now, let me just pull that up for you. Get to it. It's electronic. What I'm reading now is Win Pinball by Haruki Murakami. These were Haruki Murakami's first two published works. One is called Hear the Wind Sing. That was his first one, and the second one's called Pinball 1973. I really just started this. It's got a really nice introduction by Murakami himself to these works, and I have read through the introduction, and at the introduction, Murakami talks about how he came to be a writer, how he came to write Hear the Wind Sing, which is the first thing he wrote, and then following that, Pinball 1973. And his introduction, his story about how he became a writer sounds like a Murakami novel. There's a baseball game, there's a sudden flash of inspiration when a bat hits a ball, there is another epiphany that occurs when he comes across a wounded pigeon that he picks up to take to the local police station to get it some help. I haven't started. I just started the Hear the Wind Sing, the novella, but I hope to get these finished within the next couple of days. This is actually the last work of my must-read list. So from now, after following this, I will just be reading off of sort of ad lib reads, and the first one that I'm going to read, what I'm going to do, I think, I do have a sort of a loose idea of what I'd like to read during this next 2-month period. I'll be doing this sort of free reading from now until, after I finish Win Pinball. So the rest of September, as well as October and November, and then December will be devoted to a month of rereading certain works. So for about the next little over 2 months, I'll be just free reading. The first things I'm going to get to are some new releases, and the first one that I'm going to read is called The Uploaded by Ferrett Steinmetz. This came out earlier this month. This is a science fiction cyberpunk. Let me just pull up the description of it here. It says, in the near future, the elderly have moved online and now live within the computer network. But that doesn't stop them from interfering in the lives of the living, whose sole real purpose now is to maintain the vast servers which support digital heaven. Digital heaven, I love that. For one orphan, that just isn't enough. He wants more for himself and his sister than a life slaving away for the dead. It turns out that he's not the only one who wants to reset the world. Yeah, so this just sounds really good to me. I read a series by Ferrett Steinmetz, a fantasy series called the Mancy series. Last year, the first one's called Flex, and the second one's called The Flux, and then the last one's called The Fix. And I loved that series. That was about magic. It was an urban fantasy series. So I saw that Ferrett Steinmetz had a new work out, and I was like, yep, I'm on board with that. So that's going to be the first one I read on my free reading. So I'll get to that following Hear the Wind Sing, Pinball 1973. So until next time, take care. Bye.